Oh, and we're doing something that we don't normally do. We discovered it at a ministers' meeting a week ago, and we now have the closed captions at the bottom of the screen. So if that helps anybody else, besides some of the obvious people, we're just celebrating the fact that we have this technology. So that's a lovely thing. So welcome and good morning, and thank you to those of you who were there last night. We did have a lovely, spirited celebration. It was sweet, and once again affirmed the fact that it's clear that we miss each other greatly. So I'm going to tie together today our peace practice with forgiveness, because I am of the opinion that in order to be a peace troubadour in the world, it clearly has to start here. And since our teaching is always from the inside out, it simply makes sense to pay attention to that. And so wherever you and I carry ill feelings towards someone, wherever we have ill feelings where it's renting space in our brain, we are less available for peace. So just come with me for just a quick moment or two, if you will, on this practice, and then we will close with our normal peace practice. So when you're ready, if you're willing to, become still, close your eyes so you can turn away from any outer distraction. Go into that inner landscape of beauty and strength, and find any place right now within, any place where there might be someone living inside of your heart or your mind. And these people are renting space in not a great way. And bring their faces to mind for just a moment. Get present to them. Get present to your feelings. And then remember who you are. Remember your practice. Remember that you are more than that particular feeling, and you have the capacity to rise above, to free them from your prison, and to free yourself from your prison. And just surround them with some white, loving light. And just keep breathing naturally. And let go of your opinions, your judgments, your blame for anything that you think they caused in your life. Be the peace in this situation. Bring it. Free yourself. Free them. Take a nice breath. Once again, remember who you are. And now repeat after me, if you will, please, while muted. I am the peace I wish to see. I know this peace for my family.
I know this peace for my family.
I know this peace for my community. And my community knows this peace for the world.
And my community knows this peace for the world.
Thank you all. Abundant love. And now we welcome Ed Sunwolf with our Power Talk.
Good morning. And as my people say, Sio or Osio, which is basically a general greeting. Forgiveness. It's a necessary part of life for our growth. We have to train ourselves to use forgiveness as a regular, essential part of life. The only way to control the need for forgiveness is to be mindful of who we want to be and to live non-judgmentally, which is not a complete impossibility. I say that from my own struggles and my own successes. It's about the willingness to do the work, which is all about our benefit and our release. Forgiveness releases the chains and cuffs we subconsciously and spiritually add to our own souls. Forgiveness is freedom of the soul to grow, to be more of who we are. And on that, I'd like to share a little story that shows how forgiveness expands beyond yourself. I had two relatives dear to me, my mother and my sister. For some reason, too much alike, could not see eye to eye on the color of the sky, or the color of a blue car. They just couldn't. And this extended before me because my sister's way older than I am. And I was just beginning my journey into forgiveness with Reverend Michelle and trying to build my own consciousness around it. And my sister's one of those high-tone people. She can go from 0 to 6,000 in the blink of an eye, leave you standing there going, what happened? What did I do? I don't understand. So I came up with the concept of yelling back at her would not help. Being angry is not going to help. Showing emotion is not going to help. So when I would see that part of her starting to edge up, first thing I would say is, are you okay? You all right? You seem like something's bothering you. And at first it was like, oh no, I'm fine. You're the problem. I just said, okay, that would listen. And I just constantly repeated that. So after a few months, I noticed when I would go, are you okay? Are you all right? She'd turn it off in an instant. I'm like, oh my God, look at that. That's scary. That's freaky. It's like she's schizophrenic or something. She's like, I'm fine. I'm fine. I was just thinking about something. I'm like, okay, is there anything I need to help you with? She goes, no, I'm fine. And eventually that went with, it worked with my mother as well. And since her and my mother could not see eye to eye, I was often talking to my sister and telling her, you know, mom's from a different generation. She's at the end of her life. She's not changing. She don't care about changing. It's us that have to adopt and continue loving her through whatever trauma she's carrying. So after constantly repeating this, constantly going over this, and then her seeing and noticing my relationship with mom, because when mom would go off, I would just go, are you done? Because we still got to deal with whatever this is. It's not going away. You could be mad at me, you can curse it, we're still going to deal with it. And mom eventually come around, she's like, boy, I don't like you. I don't know, you love me. She goes, yeah, I do, but that's beside the point. But with that, my sister began to see that there was an actual loving part of her mother that she actually forgot about. And right before my mom passed, her and my sister talked, and then I went by my sisters and I'm like, so let's go now. She goes, I talked to your mother today. I'm like, oh my God. She goes, we talked for 3 hours. I misstepped and almost fell in the hallway. Like, what? 3 hours? Because yeah, we got to talk and clearly hear about a lot of good things. So I'm like, oh wow, that's pretty good. But inside I'm screaming, I'm dancing. I'm like, I can't believe it, it's actually working. But and by the time mom passed, my sister had called me and said, you know, she's on a deathbed, we got to go. I was like, okay. She was the last person I expected to say, we got to go. So it really can spread and share and grow and take on a life of its own of light, life, and love if we really do ground ourselves in forgiveness, ground ourselves with non-judgment. Those two I see go hand in hand. You cannot control whether the need for forgiveness comes into your life. You can control whether or not you do follow through. So you have to do the work to build yourself to that point. But when the challenges come, we can do just that. I hope you guys don't hear my rooster in the back, just croaking, going on and on and on. But I just wanted to share that story, and I hope it encourages you all, whoever is going through whatever with whomever, to really stay with forgiveness and really understand that it goes hand in hand with being non-judgmental and just being loving and who you truly are. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. That was wonderful. Appreciate that. And now it is time for our man of the hour, our speaker today, Mr. Reverend Neil Pinkman.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you, Edward. I don't know if I'm going to be as animated as Ed was in his talk, but one thing that you did heighten my curiosity on, Ed, was what would live transcription do with the rooster? Say, would would it come over as cock-a-doodle-doo, or I don't know. It would have been interesting. So good morning, everybody. I do want to thank Dawn Lee for stepping in last minute and handling Psalm Sunday for me today. That made my day a lot easier. So I appreciate it, and thank you all for everything that happened yesterday in the party and everything. It was just really a fantastic expression of this community, for sure. You know, there's nothing that says joy like watching Donald Bay dance, you know? So that was really, really good. So yeah, today, this whole month, we're talking about forgiveness. And the interesting thing let me put it this way. This is not, and the talk today in particular, this is not a fluffy woo-woo, oh, I'm going to forgive people, sort of an idea. This is a very factual, intellectual, scientific, as well as, anecdotal talk about forgiveness, where we start with it, and the very, very real and legitimate effect that it has in our lives. Forgiveness is not something that's new. It's been around forever. And just to give you a few quotes, Mahatma Gandhi said, "Forgiveness is choosing to love. It is the first skill of self-giving love." Mother Teresa said, whatever our religion, we know that if we really want to love, we must first learn to forgive before anything else. Notice how forgiveness and love are tied in here. Martin Luther King said, "Forgiveness is not an occasional act, it is a constant attitude." And that's something that we'll get back to a little bit later in the talk, about why it needs to be a constant practice, like our other spiritual practices. Nelson Mandela, "Forgiveness liberates the soul. It removes fear. That is why it is such a powerful weapon." And I think in weapon, he means in disarming so many of the situations that we find ourselves in with people that we perceive to be adversaries, who in actuality might not be. I think probably the most functional and powerful quote that we have on forgiveness comes from someone who is an expert, an experienced teacher, someone who has done extensive work and training and dedicated at least the latter part of her life to working on forgiveness, and that's our own Reverend Dr. Michelle Wadley. And the way she sums this up, which really gets to the root of forgiveness, is we must forgive only after we have judged and condemned another. Cease the judging and condemnation, and you cease needing to forgive. I can't drive this point home enough. We must forgive only after we have judged, okay, and condemned another. Cease the judging and condemnation, and you cease needing to forgive. And there's no doubt that that's true, and that is probably the most functional part of learning to practice forgiveness, and it ties into a bunch of other things. By the way, this is the cover of Michelle's new book coming out on forgiveness. If you want to go through a forgiveness practice and learn how to do it, one, I recommend getting into the class. That's by far the best way to do it. But with this particular book, the real work of doing this and the real work of getting yourself free comes from here. So, we begin the forgiveness practice, and I'll be honest with you. Most of what I'm going to tell you today comes out of this book, comes out of the work that Michelle has done. But as she says, our forgiveness practice, we begin with others, right? Because we look outside, because it is so much easier for us to see this that way with others than it is to start within. Even those that we think are unforgivable for whatever it is that they have done. This is really this is the easiest place to start. Without forgiveness, we're kind of doomed to just repeat exactly the same issues that we've had over and over again. And we get into this endless loop that we just can't seem to get out of. And we really have to let go. We really do have to clean the slate. And like we had said a minute ago, forgiveness has two parts to it, right? We have to forgive others for their transgressions, and we have to forgive ourselves for our transgressions. However, starting with others and looking outward is always the easiest place to start. Why? Because most of us really do believe, and we go into it thinking that the pain we have and the suffering we're going through, I'm sorry, can you get me a glass of water? Thanks. Is really caused by others, right? I mean, it's so much easier for us to look out and go, it's their fault. We're pointing, we're looking outside of ourselves. It's a very easy place to go. I know there, I've been there myself. It's also true that what it does is it just distracts us from looking at the real cause and the real place that this comes from within us. One of the things that we've said over and over again all the time in this teaching, thank you, is that no one can make us feel anything. Yet we're kind of willing to let them do that. We're kind of willing to hand our power over. But if we don't give them the power to do it, it can't be done. But we're pretty willing to do it because taking responsibility for it puts things into a whole different level. I'll tell you where I learned this lesson in my own life. Years ago, after being married for 30 years, I went in to see a therapist and to work on the things that were going on in my life. And the first time I went to her office and sat with her, she said, "Tell me what's going on." And I sat there and all I did was talk about my wife at the time. Well, she did this and she did that and she did this and she and her and she and that, and I just kept, going there. And she let me go for a few minutes. I guess she felt I needed to get it out, at least some of that. And then she looked at me and she said, "Why are we talking about her?" And immediately my body and everything went like this. Well, I could feel myself withdraw back into the chair because it was so much easier to blame her than it was to look inside and say, what do I need to change? What is it in me that has really caused this to happen in my life? But one of the things that I found that is really, really helped me, and that particularly in this workbook that Michelle has, that she brings out beautifully, is the idea of blame, that we're blaming others. And honestly, it is true that we use this unconsciously. It's used to deflect our responsibility, but it ended up being extremely helpful for me to use blame, to get it out. But I did it with the help of a professional, to have professionals like Reverend Michelle, and to have professionals like the forgiveness coaches that have been trained in doing this forgiveness work, because I got out the blame. I was able to identify and just blame my mother, my father, my wife, whatever, all these different people in my life, because it helped me get it out and become aware of the fact that I was blaming someone. It helped me become very conscious of the fact that I needed to say, okay, this may be what happened, but I need to now turn it around and take responsibility for it and deal with it and heal from within. And it helped me cleanse that out. And the result of it all was that I basically went from a rage that I had towards all these people because I was blaming them into just an anger phase, and then eventually into possibly just a sadness phase. But it freed me from all of these things that were eating me alive. And that was so extremely important. And it just such a freedom, a feeling of freedom. Was I sad because I didn't have the relationship with my mother I may have wanted to have? Yes, that's true. But it allowed me to let go. So the idea that we want to be free sometimes seems a little bit unrealistic to us. It seems like it's almost impossible and unreachable, right? But the way we get to be free is to let go and not be attached. Where, freedom can't come to somebody who's attached. Basically, you can't be free and attached. It doesn't exist. Just like we say that fear and faith don't exist in the same place, attachment and freedom, it's impossible, right? You have to be free of the attachment in order to be totally and truly free. And that's why, and this is really important. These people you perceive have offended you. Their punishment is not your responsibility. Wanting them to be punished is not helping you at all. That is just what it's doing, is it's keeping you attached to the anger, the hatred, the fear, and everything that you've built up inside of yourself, okay? So, yes, I understand the point of this conversation is the fact that we're talking about why do we look outside first, right? Because these are the reasons. And through the exercise of doing this, we are much more able to look at ourselves and do it a little bit more freely and a little bit more easy. Some of these that we do blame, we think are unforgivable, that there's just no way that these people they've done things that just seem to be totally unforgivable. And actually, that's not true. It's just really not true. And all it's doing is keeping these toxic emotions built up inside of us that are only hurting ourselves. And yes, and it'll come later in the month where we talk about the self-forgiveness and how that's obviously not helping us either. There's an old saying, by the way, that goes, if you seek revenge, dig 2 graves, right? So that's really true. And the way to step out of that is with the forgiveness, that it breaks that chain. One of the things that we've done here over the past years, and Reverend Michelle has put it together so well, is what she calls now in the work she does the presuppositions. We've known them as the 15 keys, and we've known them as the foundational beliefs. And the core of forgiveness and being able to use forgiveness exists in those foundational beliefs. The number one is that nobody's ever against you, even if they think they are. And if we go back to the idea that the only reason you need to forgive is because you judge someone as being against you, think of how this one first foundational belief works to free you of that. If you really, really believe that nobody is against you, even if they think there are, you can't judge them. They're not working against you. You may be standing in front of them. They may be causing you pain. Don't get me wrong. I wouldn't deny that. But it's not their intention. So, speaking of intention, what I would like to go to is, because I did say in the beginning of this that I would give you some scientific proof. Now, I know Joe Schneider's not here today, but if he were, he'd really appreciate this science approach here. But back when I was going to ministerial school, I took a course called Neuroscience and Spirituality. They do so much work now with fMRI studies and spiritual practices. For people that don't know fMRI studies, those are studies where they actually read the brain while it's live and going through an experience and see what areas of the brain light up and what areas of the brain don't light up. It is, without a doubt, and I'll refer to the material here, I ended up having to do a paper on the effect of forgiveness on the brain through fMRI studies. And you guys can go, if you want to really have trouble sleeping, go read all these studies at pubmed.gov. And I wrote this whole extensive paper on the idea of forgiveness and how it does affect the brain. And then I had to write an article about it. And the article is, please forgive me or don't. The choice is yours, right? But the first sentence is, however, you might want to consider what effect forgiveness has on you before you decide. Forgiveness has a physical effect on the brain, and these studies prove this. It has the identical effect on the brain that other spiritual practices have, like meditation and prayer. it affects the same areas of the brain. What's interesting is that it affects the brain in a way differently if you perceive to be whatever offense you're perceiving was done against you as intentional or unintentional, that it reads entirely differently, and that there is a greater change in the brain and what lights up in the brain if the person perceives that whatever happened was unintentional or accidental. Think about that for a minute. What does that tie into? It ties right back in. Here we have an Fmri study saying no one's ever against you, right? Even if they think they are. They're saying if you perceive this person is not intentionally harming you, this area in forgiveness of the brain lights up much more vibrantly than it does in another way. If your perception is that they're out to get you, which they're not. They're just doing the best they can in order to survive. So here's the other interesting part of this, and this goes back to one of the quotes that was here that I said we would come back to, and that is from Martin Luther King Jr., that forgiveness is not an occasional act, it is a constant attitude. What Michelle teaches in all these classes is that this is a practice. Forgiveness is a practice. It's something that has to be an ongoing. And why? Well, it's also proven that there is no permanent change in the brain where you just say, okay, I'm going to do this once and now my brain has totally shifted and changed. That there's no ongoing change in the brain, that what lights up, what helps you feel better through the forgiveness of practice is there while you're doing it. So therefore you have to keep doing it. It's like any other spiritual practice. Spiritual practices is there that we do every day: the prayer, the meditation, the readings, and forgiveness. Okay. So what does this do? All of this basically, this just lays the groundwork for self-forgiveness. It makes us free. It brings us to be able to look at being more responsible, and it allows us to say, okay, I understand how forgiveness works, but what works for outside is also going to work for inside. I don't really know which week that'll be coming up, but we'll definitely be dealing more with self-forgiveness as we move forward. By the way, that book from Michelle is being published right now, and it'll be available. Highly recommend, folks. If you want to be free, learn to forgive. We look outside because it is easier. It's always harder to look at ourselves. That's why we begin outside more than anything else. But it starts us on the path, I should say, in order to live a freer life. And you can't be free and attached. And forgiveness is what gets us there. Let's take this into prayer. So I know there is a power and a presence that is there and exists always. And from that source is where forgiveness is rooted and based. I know that there is always an absolutely perfect relationship with the divine that comes from this source, that there is never any separation from this source. And in each and every moment, we have the freedom to experience that oneness, that wholeness, and that connection. I know that in each and every moment that we move, we forgive, we allow, we trust, and we have a very, very deep-seated faith in this oneness. We know that in the eyes of each person we meet, we see God. We see what is there that we are connected to. What I know is that with with each breath we breathe, with each thought we have, that we are creating this beautiful freedom, this wonderful experience of joy in our lives, and knowing that we've been given the ability to forgive. I know that this is here now. I know that I am so grateful for this moment with all of us in our community, and with the loving understanding, kindness, and forgiveness that all of us bring together to support each other here. I release these words into that power and presence that always says yes. Please join me in saying, and so it is.